Hello, guys and girls, and welcome to today's lesson. As you can see here on the screen, the topic that we're going to be talking about today is counter-argument paragraphs. This is a review. We've talked about counter-argument paragraphs before this year, but as I've told you, one of the areas that you're going to be tested on at the end of the year is on-demand writing. So even though we've talked about counter-argument paragraphs, this is going to be a good refresher just to keep everything fresh in your mind. And this is also a good time to go ahead and let you know that next week, towards the end of the week, we are going to be writing our next full on demand. So this is going to be sort of the last piece of review that we do before you have that on demand coming up next week. So the first question we need to ask ourselves is, what is a counter-argument paragraph? A couple of weeks ago, we talked about introduction paragraphs. We discussed how that is the first paragraph of the essay. It introduces the topic that you're going to be writing about and states your opinion on that topic using your thesis statement. Last week, we practiced writing body paragraphs, and we talked about how we have two paragraphs after the introduction where we build upon the ideas that we come up with in our thesis statement. And the next paragraph of the on-demand essay is what we call the counter-argument. Remember, when you counter-argue, you consider a possible argument against your thesis, and then you prove it wrong. So the counter-argument paragraph is technically a body paragraph, but it's structured a little bit differently than the body paragraphs that we talked about last week. Last week when we reviewed body paragraphs, we talked about how they start with a transition word and a topic sentence and how we get those ideas from our thesis statement. The counter argument, you actually start with the opposing argument. So you have to ask yourself, if someone were arguing against me, what would they say? That's the opposing argument. And then you give a counter argument. So you prove that opposing side wrong. After you give your opposing argument and your counter argument, the rest of the paragraph is structured just like the body paragraphs that we went over last week. You have a piece of evidence from the text that supports your counter argument, which you explain with your E2. You provide an internal transition and another piece of evidence that supports your counter argument, followed by an E2, and then the counter argument paragraph ends with a concluding sentence. So let's break this down and talk about each one of those parts of the paragraph in a little bit more detail. Like I already said, the counter-argument paragraph always begins with the opposing argument. So again, if someone were arguing against you, if they had a different viewpoint from you, what would their argument be? Why would they be on the opposite side of the argument? And then for the counter-argument, how would you prove them wrong? Our counter-argument paragraphs can begin in a couple of different ways, and you might want to take some mental notes here about these different sentence starters because, as you are probably aware, when you get done watching this video today, you are going to be asked to write your own counter-argument paragraph, and so I would encourage you to maybe jot down one of these sentence starters to help you when you get to that portion of the lesson today. So some different ways that you might start your counter-argument paragraph could be, while some may say blank, insert your opposing argument. This is not the case because blank, and that's where you would prove it wrong. Another option would be, while it is true that blank, this argument is weak because blank. Some may argue that blank, however blank, or some people believe blank, but this is not true because blank. And again, remember in the first blanks that I was inserting there, these ellipses that we've been talking about, instead of this dot, 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 you would put in the opposing argument, and then at the end, you would include your counter argument. After you introduce your opposing argument and your counter argument, like we've already said, the rest of the paragraph is structured just like a body paragraph. So you start with an E1. Remember, that's going to be evidence from the text, and that evidence should back up your counter argument. So whatever that reason was that you gave that the opposing side is wrong, find a piece of evidence from the text that proves that the opposing side is wrong. Just remember, when you are citing your text evidence, you should have a good sentence starter like the text says. You should use quotation marks, and it should be cited word for word from the text. After that E1, you're going to give an E2. Remember, the E2 is in your own words, and it is an explanation of why that piece of evidence supports your counter argument. In other words, you're telling your audience why you are right and why the other side is wrong. And remember that our E2s should be at least 2 sentences, and we do have a few sentence starters that you could use for your E2s, such as this evidence shows, this clearly demonstrates, if then, or not only, but also. After that first E1 and E2, you are going to include an internal transition. Remember, this helps our audience move from our first E1 and E2 to our second E1 and E2, and it could be something like additionally, furthermore, or also. And then you're going to jump right back in with another piece of evidence that supports your counter argument. Remember, the evidence should be cited directly from the text, and it should support your counter argument. We want to make sure that we include quotation marks around that evidence and that we have a good sentence starter like the text says. That second piece of evidence, so your second E1, is also going to be followed up by an E2. Your E2 should be at least 2 sentences where you explain why you are right and why the opposing side is wrong. Just like the body paragraphs that we talked about last week, the counter-argument paragraph is also going to end with a concluding sentence. You might state something like, clearly, or based on this evidence, it is clear, or this evidence clearly shows, and then you're going to wrap up all of the ideas that you presented in that paragraph. As promised, you are going to practice writing a counter-argument paragraph today. You should have a copy of a passage on your desk, and if you don't, you need to go ahead and raise your hand and ask for one of those. But we're going to be reading a passage together titled, Should We Bring Back the Woolly Mammoth? So again, you should have this on your desk. I'm going to read through this, and as I read, I'd like you to follow along with me. New technology could make it possible to bring back extinct animals. Is that a good idea? What if you could beam yourself back in time to the year 2500 BC? You'd get to explore a very different world from the one we live in now. You might see a saber-toothed cat stalking its prey, or a group of animal skin-clad humans huddled around a fire. Or you might come face to face with one of the most majestic creatures ever to lumber across the earth, the woolly mammoth. With their long trunks and sharp curved tusks, woolly mammoths were the kings of the Ice Age. They stood as tall as basketball hoops and weighed as much as a school bus. The last of these furry giants died out about 4,000 years ago, but traces of them can still be found. Mammoth remains, some remarkably well preserved, have been discovered in Siberia, a cold region in Russia. Now, some scientists are searching for a way to bring these behemoths back. This research has triggered a debate among scientists, animal rights groups, and the public. Is bringing back extinct creatures a good idea? Not if, but when. Bringing back extinct creatures is known as de-extinction. For decades, this idea belonged more in the realm of science fiction than of actual science. But today, advances in technology have made de-extinction less of a question of if than when. Currently, efforts are underway to bring back not only the woolly mammoth, but other extinct species as well. To understand how de-extinction might be possible, you have to start with genes. Genes are the parts of our cells that determine our traits. The color of our hair, the size of our feet, the shape of our noses. All living things have genes. They are what makes a dog's ears pointy and a bird's feathers blue. But today, advances in technology have made de-extinction less of a question of if than when. To bring back the mammoth, researchers at Harvard University are studying genes taken from mammoth remains. They are trying to find out which genes gave these creatures the shaggy coats and thick layers of body fat that helped them survive in their icy world. Once scientists identify these and other genes, their plan is to insert them into cells from elephants, the mammoth's closest living relatives. Eventually, these cells would be used to create an embryo. The embryo would be placed in the womb of an elephant, and about 22 months later, a baby, part elephant, part mammoth, would be born. Many questions. Today, thousands of creatures are in danger of becoming extinct, from tigers and gorillas to rhinos and elephants. Scientists estimate that dozens of species disappear every day. It might seem obvious that we should find a way to bring the animals back that we lose. Yet, de-extinction raises many questions. Which animals should be brought back? Where would they live? What could go wrong? And should humans really be playing God, that is, meddling with nature? For the mammoth, answering those questions is tricky. Mammoth herds probably traveled hundreds of miles a year across the icy grasslands of northern Europe, Asia, and North America. Those habitats no longer exist, and wide open spaces where mammoths could live are increasingly hard to find. Then there are concerns about the quality of life these creatures would have. They would likely live in captivity. Is it fair to bring an animal into the world to be a research subject, a curiosity basically? And what about the elephant mothers? They would endure the stress of frequent testing during their pregnancy. Plus, elephants form close bonds with their young. If a baby mammoth died or was taken away, this would be tragic for its mother. Scientists are also exploring how a mammoth baby could be grown in a lab so elephants don't have to carry them. Exciting opportunity. So, is it a good idea to bring back woolly mammoths? It would certainly be awe-inspiring and an exciting learning opportunity, a chance to bring the distant past into the present. Still, many wonder why time and money should be spent attempting to bring back a species that disappeared long ago. Wouldn't it be better to focus on protecting the animals that are endangered today, most of which are in trouble because of human activity? Maybe scientists should focus on inventing time travel instead. That way we could see any extinct creature we wanted. Stegosaurus, anyone? Here's your assignment for today. Again, this is on the paper that you have in front of you. It says read the article, which we just did that together, and then write a counter argument that proves the claim below to be untrue. So I have actually given you your opposing viewpoint. It states extinct animals should be brought back because it would be an exciting learning opportunity. So for the purpose of this assignment, your job is to prove that this statement is not true. I want to remind you of the sentence starters that I suggested that you use to begin your paragraph. They can be found on this slide here. While some may say blank, this is not the case because blank. While it is true that blank, this argument is weak because. Some may argue that blank, however blank, or some people believe blank, and this is not true because blank. Your paragraph may begin with something like, while some may say extinct animals should be brought back because it would be an exciting learning opportunity, this is not the case because, and that's where you're going to give me your counter argument. Tell me why this is not a good idea. You're going to follow that up with an E1, so a piece of evidence from the text that proves that this is not a good idea, which you are going to explain in at least 2 sentences in your E2. Then you're going to give me a transition word and another E1, so another piece of evidence from the text that proves that this is not true, which you will follow with an E2. And then you're going to wrap up your paragraph with a concluding sentence. If you need extra notebook paper, please feel free to get some. Remember, there's some in the orange box by the door. Just make sure that you turn that in with this paper before you leave.